Ontario's government is asking Ottawa to put new restrictions at the U.S. border to help cut down the still overwhelming spread of COVID-19. The province wants the mandatory 3-day hotel quarantine at airports to be extended to Ontario's busiest land crossings. Ontario Premier Doug Ford asked Prime Minister Trudeau directly at the First Minister's regular phone conference last night. Janice McGregor is following the story for us from Ottawa and joins us now. Good morning, Janice. Let's talk about this. The third time in a week that Ontario has asked Ottawa to help. What do we know about what the Premier is asking for this time?
Yeah, once again, Doug Ford very much focused on travelers as being the source of Ontario's COVID problems, even though I have to say, according to the statistics, we know that a lot of Canada's and particularly Ontario's rise in COVID cases is due to community transmission, things like workplace outbreaks. Only a few cases, small percentage comes from travel. Nevertheless, in this latest letter, which was obtained by CBC News, Ontario is requesting, as you say, a mandatory 3-day hotel quarantine at the province's busiest traffic crossings, those in Niagara, in Windsor, in Sarnia, and in Brockville in Eastern Ontario. And as you say, this is the third time in a week that Ontario ministers have written a letter directly to the federal government and then also shared it with the media, making sure that everyone knows the demands it's making of the federal government. Now, requesting a quarantine at land borders, it was considered earlier, but they looked at some of the hotel facilities, particularly around smaller land crossings, and decided that this was not something that they were going to be able to do kind of equitably. It just wasn't logistically possible. But since then, what some people have been doing is flying to U.S. airports that are close to a land border and then getting around the quarantine rules at Canadian airports and simply crossing at the land border and then promising to isolate for 14 days. And there's been skepticism that that really works and that's really enough. But I have to say it's also not clear that land travelers are really a source of a lot of COVID cases. The Public Health Agency of Canada keeps data on the tests that they are required to show when they cross. And only about 0.25% of those test results, according to data shared with CBC News, is coming back positive. And that compares to just under 2% of the test results from air travelers. Now, earlier this week, the Ford government had already written to the Trudeau government looking for more testing at land borders. It also wants more testing around domestic flights, something that would be quite logistically difficult. And again, as you say, Premier Ford raised these things on the call last night between the premiers and the Prime Minister.
Okay, Janice, so how realistic is the Ford's government proposal?
Yeah, that's a good question. It is logistically challenging. A readout from last night's call suggests there wasn't a lot of consensus about how to proceed, aside from the fact that everyone agrees that Canadians should be limiting non-essential travel. Although, as Intergovernmental Affairs Minister Dominic LeBlanc said earlier this week, the federal government is open to talking about things the provinces feel might work. I want to play a short clip from New Brunswick Premier Blaine Higgs. He was talking to our colleagues on Power and Politics last night. Here's how he summed up that part of the conversation.
Time is indeed of the essence, and the Ontarians are feeling it directly. So it's not a matter of talking about it for a while longer. It's about acting very quickly, and I think that sense of urgency was certainly displayed adequately. But the need to act is very much a priority, certainly for Ontario.
I feel, though, I just need to note, John, that while provinces like Higgs in New Brunswick and Atlantic Canada generally did act very quickly to implement a bubble because of fears about cases being brought in by travelers, that is something that Ontario has never wanted to do, that kind of a bubble strategy, putting in those kind of restrictions and having to implement that at the provincial level. So the Ford government looking again to the federal government to take some stronger steps.
Thanks for this, Janice.